May I have your attention for a very important public service announcement? We are taking over the internet, and the United States champion of word wrestling entertainment has returned for another edition of the Pocket Locker podcast. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, folks, I am in airplane mode. All right, everybody, so good to see you. Great to see the gang. Lena's here, Carrie Ann's here, Sumami's here. Great to see y'all. Let's jump into this. Look, we ain't got a lot of time. We ain't not gonna be with y'all for long. But look, Seth Andrews came out with a new video today, 11 hours ago, called 14 Things the Misguided Religious Establishment Doesn't Want You to Know. And despite my overwhelming, oppressive, just straight slave-like busyness that my academic schedule requires of me, I carved out some time to preview this, and I was like, this is actually really good. This is actually really good. And like so many things, gang, it's just one of those things where I saw it and I was like, God, I just wish I could share this with my family. Why can't my family just watch shit like this? I wish I could just send it to them and blow up their whole faith, without any repercussions. But I decided to share it with y'all instead. So let's go ahead and get into it. It's actually not a very long video. It's succinct, but I definitely have thoughts and commentary to add. So let's go ahead and get started. Yeah, I done forgot to change the set. I done forgot to change the set. Whoops. There we go. All right, let's do this. Look at that. Side by side. Together as one. All right, here we go.
Jim Palmer is a chaplain for the American Humanist Association. He's also founder of the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality. And before you blink away his use of the word spiritual, I understand his context here, or at least I think I do. Spiritual is a word that can invoke actual spirits, but we also live in a world where language sometimes has limits. And so spiritual can mean a moment or an experience that is transcendent. It transcends the ordinary to be something remarkable. Well, Jim posted something remarkable on social media. It's been out there for a while. I just saw this yesterday, and I'm still thinking about the words, digesting them, considering them. So much of what he said just hit the bullseye. It's so well written that I want to share it with you. Now, I haven't told Jim that I am reading his.
And I want to share that with you. And I haven't told Seth Andrews that I'm going to be sharing this with you. So it'll be a surprise to him.
His work, this will be a surprise to him, hopefully a welcome one.
Probably
Posted by Jim Palmer, June the 19th, 2023.
What's up,
he
Katina?
said this. As you know, I once was an evangelical megachurch pastor, and my pastoral career stretched over many years. Eventually, I could no longer teach Christian doctrine with a good conscience and realized this teaching was not truly changing people's lives. And so I walked away from the whole enchilada. Below are 14 things that the misguided religious establishment doesn't want you to know.
All right. Now we're gonna go ahead and get into the list, but before we do, y'all, I wanna respond to a couple of things because I'm one of them folk, right? So I'm one of those people who, to be honest with you, like somebody throws the word spiritual or spirituality at me, it is kind of thought stopping for me. And so I wanted to respond to that. Overall, I just want people to know where I'm at. I'm one of those non-believers that just doesn't think we have really good enough reason to believe in anything supernatural. And so I don't jive really with spiritual thought. And there's two things I tend to think about it. One is it tends to be like working backwards from a God idea, right? It tends to be sort of recognizing religion and the different religious traditions and maybe noticing the issues or the lack of evidence or the way, you know, that we can't really maybe support them. But then like hanging on to these religious notions that I don't see how they have any more grounding. It's like you like a lot of people, I think they take a, well, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater approach to religion, right? And so they're like, well, there's still this as Steph, I think would call it, like the experience of the numinous. Other people say that shit too. And and yeah, I'm just not one of those people, and it is kind of thought stopping for me in a way like that. But also I notice how for most people, I'm like, where does that come from? Like, where does their feeling and understanding of spirituality come from? And usually, again, it's people who really it's like a response to God ideas. And so I think it's interesting in this case where this person's a former evangelical pastor. You know, it sounds like they definitely were, you know, deeply involved in the religious idea. Um, and I think if they really held spirituality to the same scrutiny, they'd realize it pretty much always runs into the same problem. Um, so that's where I'm at, right? And not a lot of atheists are there. I know there's a lot of people in the community that see themselves as spiritual in one way or another. I just don't. But irregardless, um, we're setting that aside, right? Like that's kind of we're kind of setting that aside. I wanted to kind of make that point because I am kind of that way. I know this person's like got a whole secular, spiritual, humanist thing going on. I didn't want people to like wonder if I'm promoting that. Like, no, not particularly, but you know, we're gonna set that aside so we could get down on the same page about addressing religious institutions. All right, cool. Let's go.
Speaking for myself and my personal experience, I was not able to see
Appreciate
or
you rolling.
admit
What's up,
these things to
Amber?
myself. I truly got into ministry initially because I wanted to make a difference and help people. And I relied on the belief system I learned as the proper framework to achieve this. It took a lot of post-religion reflection to see the ways this belief system was hurting people. I offer the below list in hopes that you might disentangle yourself from harmful beliefs and attitudes impacting your life.
Okay, now look, all y'all softies out there, y'all should be happy we're doing this. Because this is sort of like that like good faith framing of this conversation, right? This is the talk you want to have with your friends, your family. Like I said, this is something I would want to share with friends and family, like loved ones, because this is where the conversation proceeds, like not from some like, oh, you're a fucking asshole apologist who I want to tear down, but more like you're someone I genuinely thinks that God is the way to be good. And they fully brought into this idea that, you know, adhering to the religion is the best way, not only for them to be, but also the way for them to like help others and serve the community or whatever. Um, and so I like having that up front, right? And then also offering the criticism, like, oh, I'm really just hopeful that this will help you find a way out, like I did. And so a lot of times I'm coming out with piss and vinegar, looking for a fight, willing to choose violence. Hey, I'm the United States champion of World Wrestling Entertainment. You know what I'm saying? This is a business where every once in a while a chair shot or putting a motherfucker through a flaming table is called for. But today we on a different vibe.
Number 1, toxic religion is rooted in fear, especially fear about the afterlife. It leverages the false doctrine of hell to win converts and demand holiness. The fear of God's disapproval, rejection, abandonment, and punishment is another hallmark of toxic religion. 2.
All right, and toxic relationships, right? Like this is again, right? This is kind of an interesting Seth Andrews because it's literally just like a countdown of the 14 points. So it's like perfect. Just coming here with a little bit of commentary up in this piece. But yeah, it's there's a real way in which I would first want a lot of Christians to really step back and really reflect on the way in which a lot of this proposition and this relationship is based on fear, and then understand the next step that like that can't be the basis and foundation of a loving relationship. And so again, I'm gonna just throw out the Uncle Bobby criteria for being like the way you identify a battered spouse, right? The irrational belief that your abuser is omnipresent, the irrational belief that the abuse is your fault, the irrational belief that you find your purpose and meaning in your abuser, and the irrational belief that if the abuser doesn't get you, they'll harm your friends and family. Now, what part of that is not Christianity? Um, so that's important, right? Because if a person genuinely can understand that, it could hopefully help them understand that they're not being attacked personally. This is literally as we learn, like they understand science, right? As we do research, as we investigate things, one of the issues that we're really trying to do better about in society is dealing with abusive relationships and relationship violence. And so, hey, like we've come to this understanding. And when you tell us that you have this God figure and all the threats against us, and then look at the history of the character even in the book. So yeah, we're gonna keep it rolling, but like I really do think that that's a very important point. We could bring it down to the fear of hell, but it's a little bit more than that. Sorry, my mic is crispy right now. I'm gonna see what's up.
Clergy have no innate authority. Holding a church leadership position or having a theological degree does not imbue a person with special divine authority or superiority. The terms anointed, called, or chosen, or titles such as pastor, priest, bishop, elder, evangelist, or apostle do not confer any innate authority on an individual or group. Number 3.
All right, so number 2 is interesting because the way I think of it is just that sort of spiritual um background and elevation isn't actually indicative of real expertise with anything in the real world. Of course, there's even projects. Can't think of the name, but there's a project that's about helping to train pastors and find them employment in other lines of work. Um, but yeah, this is a real sort of like mind blown type of moment, I think, for a lot of Christians, because so much of the authority over their life, you got to remember, they're not just seeing their pastors. I mean, part of it is right. They see them as being experts in the um, experts at pastoring, right? So experts at sermons and overseeing a ministry or theology and things like that, right? But they also put them in a position of authority over them. So pastors play a lot of influence then in their major life decisions, where they work, what type of work they might do, maybe even who they'll accept being in a relationship with, or what the boundaries or parameters of that relationship are, how they should raise their children, maybe how they vote, right? So it's a crazy amount of authority to even that you wouldn't even it wouldn't even be appropriate to give a person who actually had expertise in one particular discipline or area of life or another. But you take the combined impact of both those things, the fact that what the heck do pastors have expertise, and then on top of that, why are you letting these people be like not even just the key to how you interpret your scripture or your faith, but how you live your life? It's kind of crazy. And yeah, that it amounts to ending up like you're actually in a cult of personality for that religious figurehead.
We hold sacred what we are taught to hold sacred, which is why what is sacred to one community is not sacred to another. 4. The stories in our sacred books aren't history, nor were they meant to be. The authors of these books weren't historians, but writers of historical fiction. They used history or pseudo-history as a context or pretext for their own ideas. Reading sacred texts as history may yield some nuggets of the past, but the real gold is in seeing these stories as myth and parable, and trying to unpack the possible meanings these parables and myths may hold.
And that's a problem. It's a big problem. And obviously we can use any sort of fictional example, like, the Spider-Man or whatever, like just because Spider-Man takes place in New York City, or some movie you watch, accurately depicts that, it happened during the Nixon administration or something like that. And it turns out Richard Nixon actually was president of the United States. That doesn't mean that the story is true. But more than that, I think a couple of key things to think about are, um, one, it's difficult for a lot of people because if they can't proclaim a unique historicity, especially to the miraculous aspects of those narratives, then it loses its privileges. It loses its privilege over other narratives, right? They sort of see other faiths and other traditions as that. They see them as just that, coming from um a sort of fictitious, in some sense, essence, may be sprinkled in with history, this or that, right? And so, but they see theirs as elevated above that because their book is true, right? And that's where there's that dependence on it, sort of aligning with history and sometimes science and all this other stuff. And I think that gets lost in the conversation a lot, because when we talk about biblical literalism and things like that, we tend to again focus on a sort of a smaller, more extreme group. So we talk about, for instance, like, fundamentalist or whoever, like, and the people who take, like, for instance, the creation narrative literally, or the flood literally, right? Or the Tower of Babel literally, right? And they become our model of the literalist, right? But at some real level, especially for me as a former Christian, in order for the religion to be true in a way that you could say this religion is true and the others aren't, no historicity other than the actual miraculous fundamental core of the faith is really meaningful. Okay, so Pontius Pilate was a real person. The Bible isn't about establishing the historicity of Pontius Pilate, right? The story is about, from a Christian perspective, some, I know I'm being too broad, but the redemptive death and resurrection of Jesus or whatever, right? So that's what's at stake, really. So if you think about it that way, then in a sense, who's not a biblical literalist, right? Because and that ties to this other issue of where does that metaphorical, fictive story versus actual historical event, where does that start, right? And that's kind of what I was getting at. Like, we tend to think of the people who believe certain stories and certain traditions as being the literalist, but no, they're all literalists. Y'all see what I'm saying? Like, it's weird because, again, who's willing to say that they believe maybe Jesus's death and resurrection were metaphorical? I did get to that point as a Christian, but I would say overall that was rejected and not taken seriously, to the point that I wouldn't even talk about it with most Christians because I knew how much they pretty much laugh in my face.
Number 5, prayer doesn't work the way you think it does. You can't bribe God or change God's mind through obedience, devotion, or groveling. The underlying theistic premises of prayer are untenable. 6, anything you claim to know about God, even the notion that there is a God, is a projection of your psyche. What you say about God, who God is, what God cares about, who God rewards, and who God punishes, says nothing about God and everything about you.
Religion is the worship of your own ego, said the great philosopher Robert Reed.
If you believe in an unconditionally loving God, you probably value unconditional love. If you believe in a God who divides people into chosen and not chosen, believers and infidels, saved and damned, high caste or low caste, etc., you are likely
also pause the tape, gang. If y'all been missing your Uncle Bobby fix, what you need to do is you need to head to Peter's channel. Gonna go for it. That's where Uncle Bobby's been dropping vids lately. So there is, I think, a post on my community tab that should have a link to there. But yeah, go show Uncle Bobby some love.
someone who divides people into in-groups and out-groups, with you and your group as the quintessential in-group. God may or may not exist, but your idea of God mirrors yourself and your values. 7, nobody is born Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Catholic, Protestant, etc. People are born human and are slowly conditioned by narratives of race, religion, gender, nationality, etc. to be less than human. 8,
Yeah, it's ooh. Yeah, so it's funny because you hear them rail so much against the world and worldliness, and they start talking about how everything's indoctrination, and they don't see the irony that, again, nobody's born with their faith or beliefs, and so literally, um, not only does their belief the result from indoctrination, but they're usually um, actively indoctrinating their own children, but not just their children, like anybody around them, right? A lot of times, even to the point of, like, again, what I consider very toxic behavior, which is like really building relationships just so that they can evangelize to people. They think that that's beautiful. They think that that's a wonderful, like admirable thing to do, like spend 6 months befriending a coworker just so you could drop the Jesus bomb on them one day, right? But most of us would consider that toxic as shit. Imagine somebody like pretended they wanted to be your friend for 6 months, but really they just wanted to sell you something, right? Or really they just wanted to get you to, go somewhere with them or whatever. Like most of us would feel very betrayed by that effort, right? But Christians pretend like that's all good. Um, and this is where a lot of my active resistance to Christianity comes from. It comes from like I would feel very differently if it was a faith that was just practiced privately. I'm not saying I would be okay with it. I'm not saying I would like it. I'm not saying I wouldn't give it no smoke, but probably the level and frequency and intensity of the smoke I give it is a big factor in that is the perpetual gaslighting I feel just interacting in a world filled with Christians, right? Because again, they're doing this type of toxic manipulative relationship building and going to look around to the rest of us and tell us that they're like these incredibly loving people because God is love and all of this shit. And I'm about to be like, no, no, no. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, at least if I keep it cool with my coworkers or whoever's around me, it's because, I don't have shit to sell them or shit to hide. Um, so, you know, that's part of that. Uh, yeah, let's keep going. I'm good.
etc., to be less than human. 8. Theology isn't the free search for truth, but rather a defense of an already held position. Theology is really apologetics, explaining why a
So
belief
good.
is true rather than seeking out the truth in and of itself. All theological reasoning
Oh,
is circular, inevitably proving the truth of its own presupposition. Number 9.
oh, that's so good. That's so good. Um, yeah, and it's why I think, trying to mix religion and science is a dangerous business. There's a lot of people who do it, but they do it from a spiritual commitment, right? They do it from a commitment to their faith and then say, "Well, I'm committed to standing firm in my faith and let me reach out and bring science into alignment with that worldview rather than seeking out what's true and then determining if there's a need to affirm a God belief based on what we actually find. And of course, I think when you start doing that, things quickly get upside down.
Becoming more religious cannot save us. Religion is a human invention reflecting the best and worst of humanity. Becoming more religious will simply allow us to perpetuate compassion and cruelty in the name of religion. Because religion always carries the danger of fanaticism, becoming more religious may only heighten the risk of us becoming more fanatical. Number 10. Becoming less religious cannot save us. In fact, being against religion can become its own fanaticism. Becoming less religious will simply force us to perpetuate compassion and cruelty in the name of something else. Secular societies that actively suppress religion have proven no more just or compassionate than religious societies that suppress secularism or free thought. This is because neither religion nor the lack of religion solely nullifies our human potential to act out of ego, greed, fear, hostility, and hatred. 11.
Okay. All right. This is something I think I disagree with pretty strongly, and I also think misrepresents the issue. So just off the top, there's some both sidesism and whataboutism uh, that goes along with this that I think is problematic. Also, there's a conflation of political and state regimes that are atheist, either, sort of in their um in name or in principle or in the official religion of the leadership or the leader, the head of state or whatever. Like, they're not necessarily they're not really regimes based on secularism, and certainly not atheism in any sort of meaningful way. They're usually fascist regimes in and of themselves. So it's there's a lot going on there. Also, I don't I don't think it's not really about necessarily oppressing people for being religious so much as it's about recognizing when people bring their religiosity into social or public spaces and having a proper response to that that does not enable them to use their religious beliefs as a shield for harmful behaviors, harmful ideas, harmful policies. The list goes on and on. So to say it's like to me, the people who say, well, don't worry about getting rid of the guns, because if you get rid of the guns, people are going to still find a way to kill each other. Yeah, they will. The goal is to make it as hard as we can to do that. The goal is to not make it easy. The goal is to again, get rid of things that make it easier or more likely that that's going to happen. So yeah, I think, and that's what we see, is that we see the abuse of religion in these ways. And to me, there's another conversation which is about the truth. We have been dealing with these religious claims for so long, and there comes a point where we have to say something about the world we want to live in and how we think that world works. And for people that are taking an honest assessment of the way we reason about the world around us, there's no indication to support any sort of supernatural entity. So why then shouldn't it become the public meta to use that as the basis? The basis should just be, it should be normal and perfectly acceptable for when someone makes a religious claim, just be like, I'm not sure that that's actually true. That's what it's about. It's not about person. It's not saying that you can't go pray. It's not about saying you can't go visit your mosque. You can't give 10% to this corrupt ass organization if that's what you really feel like doing. But it's about saying you don't get to have some kind of privilege that allows you to claim knowledge or understanding about the way the world works when you've got nothing to back it up. And it should be perfectly acceptable for the rest of us to say, you know what, I'm really kind of getting sick of the way that we have to keep legitimizing these superstitious ideas, and further, how much progress it cost us. Because we gotta divide every issue up and give them a voice and give them representation. And we gotta both sides all the issues. And we just want to live in a different world. And why aren't people gonna more honest about that? Why aren't they more honest about what we're really asking for?
7. A healthy religion is one that helps us own and integrate the shadow side of human nature for the good of person and planet, something few clergy are trained to do. Clergy are trained to promote the religion they represent. They are apologists, not liberators.
That's right.
If you want to be more just, compassionate, and loving, you must do the personal work within yourself.
That's right.
And free yourself from the conditions that lock you into injustice, cruelty, and hate. And this means you have to free yourself from all your narratives, including those you call religious. Number 12.
And that's the other thing too, is we have to acknowledge, like, I think the same way we have to acknowledge our history in matters of race and matters of discrimination, matters of like the land grant institutions and just all the genocides. Like we have to get real and get serious about shit. Eventually we have to get real and get serious about the fact that people who would otherwise be fine are in effect hate mongering in the name of religion. And that for too long we've allowed people to do that, and that people continue to do it. And so I don't think it's okay to then be neutral about these ideas. These aren't just, again, this isn't even like people who believe in cryptids, right? Or people who believe in the fairy tales or weird things like that, where there's sort of maybe a curiosity to them, right? But there's no, systematic dogma or doctrine that harms or marginalizes particular groups of people.
Religious leaders claim that their particular understanding and interpretation of their sacred books should be universally accepted. Religious leaders often say, "My authority is the Bible." It would be more accurate for them to say, "My authority is what they taught me at seminary the Bible means." People start with flawed or false presuppositions about what the Bible is, such as the Bible was meant to present a coherent theology about God, or is a piece of doctrinal exposition. The Bible is the inerrant, infallible, and sole message, words of God to the world. The Bible is a blueprint for daily living. Too often, religious leaders make God about having correct theology. There are a lot of unhappy, broken, hurting, suffering, depressed, lonely people in church with church-approved theology. Number 13. If your livelihood depends on the success of your church as an organization, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that you will mostly define and reward Christianity as participation in church structures and programs. Christian living is mostly a decentralized reality or way of life, not a centralized or program-dependent phenomenon. Church attendance, tithing, membership, service, and devoted participation become the hallmarks of Christian maturity. And number 14, you are capable of guiding your own spiritual path from the inside out and don't need to be told what to do. You naturally have the ability, capacity, tools, and skills to guide and direct your life meaningfully, ethically, and effectively through the use of your fundamental human faculties, such as critical thinking, empathy, reason, conscience, and intuition. You can capably lead your life. You have the choice to cultivate a spirituality that doesn't require you to be inadequate, powerless, weak, and lacking, but one that empowers you toward strength, vitality, wholeness, and the fulfillment of your highest potentialities and possibilities. I have provided a link to Jim Palmer's post in the description box of this video. So
I think that's interesting. Obviously, again, like not really with all the spiritual mumbo jumbo at the end of the day. And I think for most people, I actually kind of think it's best for people to just leave it all behind. Like I really do, because I think if you can, that's where you're going to be the most stable. And I also think if not, people are suspect of falling into a lot of different things. like a lot of other cults, a lot of other schemes, a lot of other grifts. But I also do think there's some legitimacy to the idea, especially for people who've become so dependent on something that they may need a sort of spiritual off ramp to get them from their current theistic beliefs to a more agnostic or atheist place, if that's where they might end up. um and I can see that. And there's definitely a sort of practicality to that as like a harm reduction measure, right? Like it's a step in the right direction. It's sort of uh, you know making progress. So I think it was a nice tone from the end on. I think, and especially this person sort of focused on spirituality. So I'm fine with that. So yeah, those were definitely 14 really good things. Like I really enjoyed that list. I want to throw in a bonus thing. Um, because I'm sure there's lots of them. But one thing I was thinking about is that the intensity of your emotions or experience does not correlate to the truth of your beliefs. I think when so many people think about their faith, it just triggers their emotional centers in a way that nothing else does. Um, and then it becomes like so defensive because you're talking about something that means so much to me, right? And it's, you imagine that white knuckling, that like squeezing onto something that's become so important to them. And the truth is, it's really just, like that's okay, but really the process about most things is you try to figure out if it's true first, then you believe it, then maybe that belief becomes important to you. And people seem to really think that, they can skip that entire process and just jump straight to, well, this is how much it means to me. And, you know, like, it's not doing you any favors. All right, gang. Appreciate everybody. Let's keep it kind of brief tonight. I know the transpositions is on, I believe, at 8 over on the new channel. So I believe you'll catch Bree and Steph and Ember over there. I'll probably be hanging out and gather. I'll definitely be hanging out and gather. Probably playing cards. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing. I'm getting ready to get some food. But yeah, we'll be in gather. I appreciate everybody. There's links in the description if you want to support the channel. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, all that good stuff if you're watching later. Love you guys. We'll see you next time. Said I'm gone.